The heavy oak doors of the Prime Minister's study slammed shut with an ominous thud, leaving Harry and Meghan sitting in stunned silence across from the steely-eyed new leader of the United Kingdom. Nigel Walters had just taken over as Prime Minister a few months prior after the previous administration collapsed, and he was wasting no time making good on his populist promises to restore traditional British values and institutions. "Well, that's that then," Walters said flatly, steepling his fingers as he leaned back in his leather chair. "Parliament has officially voted to terminate your remaining royal titles, allowances, and privileges, effective immediately." Meghan felt the blood drain from her face as a ringing built up in her ears. Though they had been repeatedly warned this day was coming after the acts of complete traitorism against the crown, some delusional part of her had never truly believed it would happen. At least not like this, so suddenly, so completely. Harry seemed to deflate next to her, the weight of centuries of tradition and duty beaten out of his ramrod-straight posture all at once. His throat worked soundlessly as he struggled to find words, any words in the face of this brutal reality. For a long, tense stretch, the only sound was the faint ticking of an antique clock on the study's mantel. Finally, Meghan found her voice, a thin whisper that still conveyed utter disbelief. "You mean, everything? Our titles, our security, our home at Frogmore, every last." She couldn't bring herself to actually say it out loud. Prime Minister Walters gave a curt nod, his expression utterly devoid of empathy. "That's exactly what I mean. Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Stripped. Coat of arms. Eliminated. Sovereign grant allowance. Cut off entirely. Frogmore Cottage on Crown lands. Reverted back to state ownership. Taxpayer-funded security details." He shook his head firmly. "Gone, you'll have to make your own private arrangements." Harry opened and closed his mouth, looking utterly poleaxed as the enormity of their sudden reversal crashed over him in waves. Just a few short years ago, he had been perhaps the most popular member of the royal family, a decorated war hero beloved by the people and public at large. Now, he was being rendered a permanent outcast, left to fend for himself completely. But," he stammered out at last. "Our son Archie." His title as Earl of Dumbarton, his claim on the line of succession also erased from the official records, Walters interjected sharply. "In the eyes of the Crown and Commonwealth, he shall henceforth be a complete commoner just like you. Unless you'd like to have him stricken from your custody altogether and returned to the royal household for a proper upbringing." The cold, loaded warning hung in the air, bringing Meghan up ramrod straight as an arm instinctively clutched her torso, as if shielding her theoretically royal womb. A furious fire flashed in her eyes, replacing the stricken dismay of a few moments earlier. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed in a low, dangerous tone Harry had seldom heard from her before. Walters regarded her coolly. "Judging by the past few years, there is little I would put beyond your capacities for poor judgment and disrespect of sacred institutions, Mrs. Markle." He let the informal address for her linger pointedly. Meghan opened her mouth to respond with a blistering retort, but Harry caught her arm and subtly shook his head. Nostrils flaring, she swallowed her impulse and gave him the most imperceptible nod, receding back into her chair but still exuding fury like a simmering volcano. The Prime Minister pressed his advantage, all pretenses dropped now as he turned an almost clinical gaze upon them. "Make no mistake, today's decisive parliamentary action represents the will of the British people, carried out with full democratic legitimacy after your repeated, willful decisions to undermine and defame the Crown. You spurned every effort at reconciliation and rapprochement. You recklessly traded away your duties and privileges for tawdry autonomy, petty feuding, and rank hypocrisy on every conceivable level." Harry's shoulders slumped even further as each lashing blow landed with precision force. He realized there could be no defiance, no fight remaining within him as the life he had once known was being systematically exsanguinated. Seeming to sense his surrender, Walter's tone took on a hint of something akin to pity? Or perhaps just contempt at the sight of the once proud, unbreakable former military officer now utterly broken before him. "The King is willing to grant you a nominal settlement and living stipend for 1 year to see you transition and get settled elsewhere. After that, you shall receive nothing more from the crown. No allowances, no taxpayer-funded benefits or entitlements of any kind. You will be well and truly, commoners. Walters paused to let that searing reality resonate, before tacking on one last verbal backhand. I trust that should prove sufficient time for you both to become financially independent, as you once claimed was your grand ambition. The bitter, mocking sarcasm in his final phrase landed with the impact of a slap across both their faces. Meghan seethed in furious silence as Harry could only sit slumped forward, his elbows on his knees and face cradled in his palms. For countless more tense seconds, not another word was spoken. Then, at last, with a perfunctory straightening of his suit lapels, Nigel Walters abruptly stood and moved for the study door. As his hand turned the knob, he cast one final implacable look over his shoulder. We've severed all remaining ties as cleanly and irreversibly as possible. The crown has spoken, the people have spoken. That chapter of the royal family's story is officially, permanently closed. His tone brooked no argument, no debate whatsoever. You would be wise to accept that cruel reality, get on with your respective lives, and pursue some long overdue self-reflection on your myriad transgressions against the very institutions that lifted you up in the first place. The inscrutable Prime Minister punctuated his searing pronouncement with one last verbal slap across their faces. Good day to you both. Without another word or backwards glance, he opened the door and simply walked out of their lives forever. Never before had a dismissal been delivered with such chilling, scorched earth levels of brutal finality. For what felt like an eternity, Harry and Meghan remained rooted to their seats, twin statues frozen in shock and despair as the echoing silence consumed them. It was only when a passing housekeeper bustled past in the hall outside and shot them a look of mild annoyance for lingering, that the final shreds of the dream shattered around them. A strangled sob broke free from Harry's throat first, like the first fissure in a crumbling dam wall. His hands frantically scrubbed at his face as he struggled in vain to hold himself together. Beside him, Meghan squeezed her eyes shut as tears began coursing silently down her own cheeks, streaking trails of mascara. In one traumatic instant, the proud father, combat veteran and adored prince was reduced to a sobbing, shattered shadow of his former self, now a complete nonentity rendered utterly homeless, untethered, and without purpose or identity forevermore. Likewise, the charismatic beloved American actress had her dreams of modernizing and ascending to the very pinnacle of the monarchy crushed in spectacular fashion. What was supposed to be their defiant declaration of independence, their triumphant breakthrough into true autonomy away from the fusty traditions of the crown, now lay in cold ruin. They had gambled, pushed their unprecedented privilege to the limits, and lost it all. As the minutes ticked by in that study, the former Duke and Duchess of Sussex slowly broke down entirely. Their wails of anguished weeping echoed down the empty halls of 10 Downing Street, mourning a loss that went beyond titles and riches. A loss of dreams. A loss of identity. A loss of home, purpose, and their very place in the world. All gone, because of their own arrogance and short-sightedness. Hours later, the emotionally and physically drained couple finally emerged from the Prime Minister's residency to be greeted by a crush of paparazzi and media crews camped outside the iconic black doors. The vulturous photographers immediately began hurling shouts and snapping away furiously when they recognized Harry's bloodshot, swollen eyes and Meghan's mascara-streaked face. There they are. The failures. Show us those tears, your highnesses. No more security to hold us back now, Ginge. The scathing taunts and jabs hit them like a barrage of bullets as they slowly made their way to a discreetly idling black SUV sent by the palace. No special escorts, no royal motorcade, just a faceless driver to spirit them off in humiliation. As a final insult, the press pack surged forth with more vicious heckling, only stopping when Harry raised a limp hand in a futile gesture to ward them off. The prince's security detail was long gone, of course, he no longer rated such privileged protection. Part of him was shocked that the feral paparazzi didn't simply trample him then and there, kick him while he was down and render a few final indignities. They certainly seemed just as ravenous and unrestrained as the media beasts his beloved mother had struggled in vain to escape.